Welcome to What Are You Sporting About podcast, a podcast about business, employment, sports, and entertainment to help educate, support, and guide you to your next level. Here's your host, attorney Savania de Barros.
Hello, everybody out there in the podcast world. I am back before you again. I am Savania de Barros, the protector of athletes, the host of this podcast, as you know, and the founder and principal attorney at the S.L. de Barros Law Firm, where we represent 6- and 7-figure business owners and athletes in business. I'm so excited to dive into the content for today because it's a much needed conversation to have. And in light of mental health, right? So May is Mental Health Awareness Month. I think this is a great conversation to be discussing with people in your family. So we'll dive into that with Beth. I do have a few announcements that I'd like to make with you guys. So you've either seen this or you're going to see that I have a new book that's coming out. It's going to launch July 31st of this year. Okay. And it's called Athletes Making Moves: How to Secure Your Future by Protecting Your Name, Image, and Likeness. So make sure that you drop some comments and drop some notes in the comment section if you want to have an individual blast sent out to you when we are gearing up to release a lot of this information to the public. I would love to have you be the person on my list where you get the first dibs on all the things that we're going to be offering. But I also want to make sure that I have you in my system so that you are updated for any events that we're having, any conversations that we're having around this book, and then, of course, all of the sweet deals that we're going to be doing and bringing to you for the launch. So without further ado, I have Miss Beth Gardner. She is a life coach to non-addicts, and she's also a cancer survivor, I believe, right?
Correct.
Yes. So she's going to feed us a lot today about the work that she's been doing around helping people to overcome addiction. But let me just tell you a little bit about her. So she has a bachelor's degree in psychology. She's also a certified life coach, and she's currently working to empower, inspire, and guide lives in the North American continent and worldwide. So she definitely wants to make sure that she helps individuals to heal so that they, if they've been negatively impacted by addiction or cancer in their personal or professional lives, she is the person who's there to help lead you out of that and into the life that you desire. So welcome to the platform today, Beth.
Thank you very much for having me.
You're very welcome. Is there anything I left out that you want to give any more foundation to our listeners about who you are?
Yes, I do want to specify that I'm specifically working with non-addicts, individuals who have been affected by those with substance abuse or addiction. And by that, I mean individuals who have gone through life without not having an addiction, but in their personal life, family life, work life, extracurricular activity life, have been surrounded by active substance abuse users or addicts, and have found to be traumatized by it. There are multi-million dollars spent on addiction facilities. You can go to an exotic location, go through a 12-step program, which is great if you have an addiction. And then you have counselors that follow you through your healing path once you've left the facility. But there's nothing for anyone on the other side. And I've actively searched on my own through large metropolitan cities, and I've come across a number of psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers, therapists licensed to help addicts, but not anyone on the other side. And so for whatever reason, while there is Al-Anon, it's only fair that people that have been caregivers, codependents, enablers, need their own path towards healing. So that is specifically what I'm focused on.
Thank you for breaking that down and explaining that, because it gives me a different perspective about what you do and who you speak to, because it's so true. So, and of course, growing up with addicts, that's a totally different conversation, right? But we know in the grand scheme of things, there are different things that individuals may experience in their childhood that tends to create a trauma for that person. And so although they weren't themselves afflicted with whatever those issues were that they grew up around, still there's some internalization of those issues that they take into their everyday life, or how they interact with other people, or maybe it shows up in their relationships. Maybe it shows up with their children, because they never understood that the afflictions that other people had did in some way impact them. So thank you for that.
Sure.
So you go ahead.
That wasn't me.
Okay. So you are a former athlete. Correct. So I want you to tell me a little bit about that and how you got into this field of helping non-addicts.
Sure. Well, throughout my life, I've been an athlete in a wide variety, of ways: softball, basketball, volleyball. Whenever there was a new season, I was in that sport. Once I went to my senior year at Drexel University, I got involved in the sport of rowing just to try it out. I love being around the water, and it just seemed like a right fit. And once I submitted my testing scores my senior year, I got invited to national team training centers throughout the United States. So from graduation on, I spent majority of my time training with world-class athletes in the hopes of earning a berth on the national team. I did not earn a berth on the national team, but that's okay. But what led me into trying to help those with addiction, as well as those that have are currently going through or have had cancer, was the fact that I was diagnosed 1 year after the retirement of rowing. So I retired in 1999. By November of 2000, when I was training to run my first marathon in Philadelphia, I was diagnosed with stage 3. And it perplexed me as to why someone as health conscious as I was, as straight-laced as I was, I wasn't involved in addiction, would have had cancer in the body. It just didn't add up. Any athlete that knows that it's gone through, any type of a sporting event, you're pretty conscious going up to event day what you're going to eat, because you know that your body's not going to respond if you don't eat according to what it's best suited for. And so I had spent my entire life eating properly. I'd grown up with a mother who was a nurse. So we didn't have white bread in the family. Fish, chicken, we weren't allowed fried food. I mean, that was snuck in by my father. He'd bring home the Kentucky Fried Chicken, and then we'd have to go dump it in a neighbor's garbage so we didn't get caught. So, I couldn't understand how it happened. And when I started to do research after I had 2 rounds of chemotherapy, so that was a total of 6 months, and then 6 weeks of radiation, I started to do research as to why this happened to someone like myself, because I was 30, right? Life had somewhat began, but my new chapter of my life was just starting. So I came across a book by the late Louise Hay, who many people I'm sure are familiar with. She wrote a book called You Can Heal Your Life. And being an active athlete, particularly at the level I was, I already knew that your body you could use your mind to perform physically so that your body would execute whatever physical activity was required in the competition. And from her book, she studied metaphysics. And from her book, I learned the true meaning or causes from a metaphysical standpoint of having breast cancer or having cancer in general. And from her definition, and I'm reading through this right now, for breast cancer, breasts represent mothering and nurturing. So it's the lack of, if you get breast cancer, it's the lack of having proper nurturing, or mothering yourself in life. And then when I read about her definition of cancer, it was deep hurt, long-lasting resentment. That was the cause of cancer. It could be from holding on to deep secrets too long, repressed grief, eating away at the self, and carrying like hatreds with you throughout life. And then that sort of is when a light bulb went on in my head, and I realized, well, my life had been surrounded by addicts, whether it be alcohol. Alcohol was the primary one, but in various areas of my life, again, whether it was sports, academic, personal life, family, there were always addicts. So I realized that I had been over the course of time, suppressing my pain and my emotional trauma from being surrounded by addiction, but also I was trying to channel it through sports by achieving. I'm a high achiever. And all of that manifested into cancer because it's not in my gene pool. And that's why I was so puzzled. Other things are in the gene pool, high blood pressure, very common things. But that's when the light bulb went on. And that's when, sort of the two areas that I became focused on, that's when I started to go try out Al-Anon. That's when I started to seek out professional help for someone like myself who's been on the other side of addiction. And that's when I started to find that I couldn't find help that I needed. Al-Anon is great. It's confidential. But it wasn't like I could leave the meeting and find a buddy to talk more about over coffee. And I am, well educated, again, I'm an athlete. And so, I'll show up with my questions to therapy and they weren't able to help me because they weren't licensed to do that. They weren't educated to do that. And many of them weren't addicts themselves or hadn't been on the other side. So they hadn't even walked the walk. Yet at the same time, they were licensed to help addicts. So if that makes any sense, that's essentially how I got to this point I am today, because I knew if I didn't work on myself and pull those toxic roots, deep roots that I weren't even aware were there, the cancer would come back. The name of the game is don't allow the cancer to come back. When you're at stage 3 and you're 30 years old, you're not predicted to make it 5 years. And I'm an athlete, so I'm thinking, well, I'm going to beat this game. How am I going to beat this game? I'm going to have to pull the roots. And so I went ahead and did the work in pulling all the toxic roots for me so that I could heal, so that the cancer wouldn't come back. If that makes any sense.
That makes a lot of sense. And I just feel like it's so prevalent for mental health awareness because, we've all heard the saying, stress kills basically, and you can get all these ailments from stress. But sometimes I don't even think people realize that they're stressing over something. One thing that athletes have in common is that they are all high achievers. And so as you were talking, I'm thinking to myself, is the high achievement to get away from all of the stuff that's happening around them, is that a form of addiction? Like the need to keep doing, to move away from all of that. Is that something that can cause the individual to become sick because they're so busy with removing themselves from the affliction of the household that they tend to try to be more, do more? Like I've been there. Sometimes I feel like I'm still there, but as a young child and a teenager and a college student, I always felt like I was diving more or deeper into something so that I can ignore all the other stuff, that's going on in the back of my mind. But you just give me like a different perspective on that, because we know that stress will kill. But where is the support for the individuals who are not technically labeled as addicts, dealing with the stressors that come from people who may have addictions? And then I want to ask you this too, though. If your family is if there are people in your family who may be addicts, does addicts have to be identified as a person who may be on drugs or alcohol? Like, right? Because addiction can take a form of something else.
Correct. Addiction can take a form of, shopping. There's pornography addiction. There's a lot. There are so many different categories of addiction. But the one I was more familiar with, particularly the environment I was growing up in, was the alcoholism. But then again, look, in all fairness, and please note that I come from a mindset that I don't believe anyone comes into this world wanting these problems. People don't come into this world, I can't believe, wanting schizophrenia, wanting bipolar, wanting that clinical depression where they are so low that all they can think of is suicide.
Right.
people don't come in saying, I want the DNA of a crack addict, or I want the DNA of an alcoholic. People don't want that. So I'm coming from literally a non-judgmental point from both sides. I'm a Libra. I'm as balanced as they get. So I'm looking at it in fairness on both sides, which is why I kept saying, why aren't there people to help myself? So yes, I do believe that for me in particular, I did channel that energy from the negative environment that I was in into a sport. I tried to positively channel it, and the talent was there. So I was able to do it somewhat successfully. But I was also raised during the generation by people that had fought through World War I, World War II, Vietnam, and the Korean War. Boomers, high energy, highly driven. So I was also I was going out to those sports to channel it, but then I was being involved in a community that was also with addiction and high energy. So, and if you're born like myself, I was someone that was just born, athletes, particularly endurance, were high energy. I'm sure there are a lot of other athletes out there that are just naturally high energy. We just move to a little quicker of a beat. We're not manic. We carry a lot of positive energy. You got to channel it somewhere.
That's true.
And that's how, they used to joke around with me. Oh, it's because I was born I had reddish hair. And I thought it's part of it because of that reddish hair. No, it's not.
That's funny.
I was hardwired as an athlete. I'm not hardwired as a decorator. I'm not a musician. Certain things I just can't do. I won't even, attempt. Forget it. I'm not singing. When I grew up in a church, they're like, do you want to be part of the choir? I'm like, no, you don't want me there. But I do see you have handbells, and I'm happy to do that. Just quietly give me a handbell, and I'll just ring it along.
That is funny.
In my kilt. But so yes, I do believe athletes do channel it. And I look at, like, for example, the Ironman athletes, Ironman, Ironman women. That's just insane. First, I'm going to run a marathon, and then I'm going to swim across the ocean, and then we're going to bicycle across the United States. I can't wrap my head around that, because for me, I was going to do one marathon and that was it. It was going to be one and done, just to get it out of the way, to do it, have the experience. But I couldn't imagine making a career out of it, particularly because I'm big to begin with. I'm a Clydesdale. So, for me to be running all the time and be wearing my knees away. So that I do believe, for me in particular, and probably for other people, it is also the environment. Go ahead.
No, sorry about that. How do individuals recognize that they are, if there's not the bright line label where you can say, okay, my mom or my dad or whoever's in the household are actual addicts, but whatever they're doing could be considered an addiction, taking that into account with a traditional addiction, and you are a person who are in that environment, not an addict, how do you recognize that you're dealing with that? How do you recognize that the trauma is there?
You don't. When you're in it, when you're in the forest of it, it's really hard to see. And I remember clearly graduating from high school and going to college and just literally wiping my brow and thinking, well, that was interesting. I don't ever want to be around that. But I was too young to know. And it was at a time period where society didn't talk about the fact that you could still move on in life, and that situation, until you deal with those issues, resurface one way or another. They come in different shapes and forms. So one of the ways, if you are, is to actively pay attention to your energy when you're in the environment. Do you find that your blood pressure raises? Do you find yourself getting anxious? Do you find yourself easily ticked off? Pay attention to your own energy, and that will help you realize that, yes, you may have stuff that's repressed. You may be truly affected by this. is it affecting your school? Is it affecting your chosen sport or any area of your life that you're passionate about? If you're finding that area you're not progressing as you should, to your personal standards, not to society, but whatever your goal is, very well, you may have deep-rooted issues. Do you suffer from depression, but you don't think it's clinical? Do you find yourself crying at times or getting emotionally depressed? That could be attributed to it. I thought by the time I reached my late 20s, I thought I was overtrained, and I was being trained by a Russian. And Russian society, as people say, they have a very strong work ethic. So I thought I was overtrained. But it wasn't the overtraining. I was still carrying it. And that for the cancer to have gotten to where it was by 2000, it had started when I was 25. So it started in 1995. So I'm competing at a national level and carrying it, and I didn't know it. And I thought I was overtrained. I wasn't overtrained. I had cancer, and it had manifested. But I was trained by the coach to work through the pain, because rowing is, a lactic acid burning sport. And it requires someone to have, a very good VO2 max. So I was trained to push through that pain, very much like track sprinters, push through it, hurdle through it. And so I was pushing through it. And as a woman, we're designed to be able to maintain a lot of pain, right? We're expected to. So I'm holding on and repressing pain and not letting it go. So,
man. No, because I feel you on that. Like I've been there, not just from an athletic standpoint, but human, and as a woman, as an adult. Like there's so many things that happen in our life, and we've been conditioned to just push through. And it's so funny you even brought that up, because it's going to be in a different talk that I have that's coming up, where I talk about the resilience of individuals and people and athletes, and we are conditioned to push through. And at points, it works. It helps, to know that you can get through anything, any form of adversity. But the part that is really damaging is the fact that you're ignoring you. You're ignoring your health and what's right for you, because your mind has been conditioned by different things and different people that know you got to keep going, where you never think, okay, is there a moment to really rest? Is there a moment to really take my right now in my own hands, to make sure that I am at my best? Because I'm sure once that happened, it's like, okay, well, now I got to go for treatment. Everything else didn't matter anymore.
Right.
So we put the future, this is where that high achiever stuff comes in. We work so hard for what's coming next that we fail to really recognize what's in the now, so that we can show up for what's next.
Sure. Absolutely. In fact, I'm having memories back when we were at the Olympic Training Center for Cyclists in Colorado Springs. That was where we were for our winter training. We did 4 hours of lifting in the morning, and then 3 hours in the afternoon, and then 2 hours of swimming at night. But they did blood testing on us, and I remember my cholesterol was dangerously low. And I was just told, well, that's because you're overtrained. I wasn't thinking, oh, I might have cancer. So what did I do that night? I hadn't been eating much red meat. I got a steak.
But hold on, Beth. I don't even understand what this overtrained means.
So I'm sleeping. I'm sleeping at night. I'm lying in bed, and my resting heart rate should be below 40, right? An endurance athlete. And it's at 114.
Whoa.
That's what I mean. We used to wear heart rate monitors, not just during training, particularly what we called steady state workouts. So it'd be like a 2-hour constant rowing repetition at a low rate. But I would wear it at night so that if I woke up, I could double check it and see where my heart rate was at. So yeah, my average resting heart rate was well over 100, which was dangerous.
Yeah, that's a lot.
So that's what I mean by overtrained. And then psychologically, I had lost the fire. I mean, we athletes, we have a burning passion, a burning desire to do the sport. And for me, I know it's through God, but there's this desire. Your brain is hardwired a certain way to respond in a sport, to compete. And I lost it. I didn't have a fire. I didn't care. But I wasn't depressed. It was just my body was shutting down. It was saying, stop, enough. But you can't explain that to a Russian athlete who's been to the Olympics. I remember having bronchitis. We used to climb Pikes Peak once a week. Pikes Peak, 14,000 feet. We could go as high as they would allow us without us getting into trouble. And then we had to run down. And the last time I said, I'm not doing it because I literally had bronchitis. I said, I'm not going to go climb 14,000 feet at altitude because he said, well, that's your decision, but you may lose your seat if you do.
Wow.
So I had to choose, by pushing through it. And, even though I was on antibiotics, they gave me antibiotics there, or not do it. And I just didn't do it. I was like, no, I'm not going to do it.
Godly.
But that's an example of, pushing to the point that I was overtrained and I had bronchitis.
That's something else. Because that was extremely dangerous, but it's another mental health issue is having that willpower to say no for yourself, because what would have happened if you had a heart attack on the mountain? You still would have lost your seat. Do you know what I'm saying?
It's a narrow pathway when climbing that, and there's not a ramp. So, I kept thinking I don't want to slip and fall, because there's a time limit to going up and going down, and it was 3 hours and 30 minutes. So if you're cutting it close towards the end, guess what? You're running down and going down a mountain at top speed that winds around.
Wow. Well, I want to bring something up. And I told you I would bring it up. So this week, I think a day before, Colt Brennan, who was an NFL football player, he also played for the NCAA. He had some passing records at Hawaii, and he died at age 37 this week. And he was a recovering addict. So I think that he was found unconscious, possibly died from an overdose.
Correct.
There's a lot that could be said about someone who has an actual, addiction and why they have the addiction, what it is that they're trying to either mask or ignore or get away from. But your specialty is helping those who are non-addicts. So individuals in Colt's family, what are some of the things that you think they may have issues with now on the back end, as they start to really take a hold of his passing, as they start to come out of that grief phase, to then really look at how that issue with him has affected their lives?
So you're referring to those that are currently grieving, maybe family members and such?
Yep. So maybe family members, any significant others. I don't know if he had children, so I'm not really sure.
Well, the first and foremost, I would say, is for them to not blame themselves and do everything in their power to wrap their head around the fact that it's not their fault. And I'm particularly talking to the enablers and the codependents, the people that loved him so dearly and wanted him to break the addiction, for fear of something like this happening. There's a responsibility non-addicts take on, codependents, enablers, that they are responsible for fixing it. They are responsible for the healing, for stopping it. It's not their responsibility. It's the person that's addicted's responsibility. And the problem when it's DNA related and not just situational related, not just because someone passed on and so you go on to a drinking binge for a while, but then you stop, right? Or you're going through a pandemic and you're inhaling food, more carbohydrates than you can burn off. And you find yourself using it as a coping mechanism, to not blame themselves, because if it is DNA related, it's like a diabetic, someone born with diabetes. It's DNA. You can't have anyone take the insulin for you. You have to make sure the diabetic takes yourself. Right. When I was diagnosed with cancer, I wasn't like, you know what, girl, I don't feel like going to chemo today. Do you mind filling in for me? That's not going to happen, So first and foremost, they need to get professional help to make sure that they don't blame themselves, because that's a heavy burden.
And is that what your organization is set up to do with particularly like people like Brennan's family, who has been on the other side of someone else's addiction?
Yes, definitely. It's to help them work through that healing process. And not to sound corny, but when I am working with people, I do see them as individual as snowflakes. And they say every snowflake is different. I personally never held a magnifying glass up, but to go with that saying, each individual comes from a different family dynamic, comes from a different birth order, has experienced it or perceived that problem in their own way, different personality types. So you can't use a cookie cutter approach in helping people to find their particular path towards healing. And ultimately, that's what I was looking for, around 2000, from 2000 to 2005, as as an athlete, just give us the roadmap. And as athletes, we could figure it out, right? Just give me the week by week, day by day, month by month program, and I'll just apply it, and I'll carry my journal with me and make sure I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. So it's also sort of my approach, is to give that individual their specific roadmap. It's also very important to set up boundaries and healthy boundaries, and knowing what that means, learning it's okay to say no. To let go of people, I have a lot of books with me here, so bear with me as I bring them up. But this book, Let It Go, one of the things I had to learn how to do is let go. What do you mean by let go? Because I was trained as an athlete, hold on, don't let anything go. You're responsible. So I had to learn how to let go. I needed someone to explain that to me. As stupid as that sounds, I needed an example. I can read the definition. I can do the workout, the manual exercise, but sometimes you need to just speak with someone confidentially, non-judgmental about it, right? You need the sounding board where you can just scream, yell. Someone that they're not going to absorb it, but they're going to be there to help you. And again, that's what I'm doing. So setting boundaries would be another thing. And also working towards that path towards healing, whatever it may be, but going through also, the entire mourning process. But I can imagine the amount of self-inflicted pain family members and friends must be feeling right now, because they could see. It's like, remember Whitney Houston? My gosh, what a gift. The number of people that must have felt responsible.
Yeah.
It's mind blowing, but people have to realize, they can't take on that type of weight. It's just too much to bear. And ultimately, sometimes it is DNA. She did the best she could to try to break it, and they do the best they could. But it's like, it just takes one pill or one drink and all bets are off.
Yeah.
And it's not your fight to bear. Unfortunately, it's painful. It is, as much as you love them. And what I feel so badly about with people that struggle with the addiction is, we're all given different gifts, and I can see their gifts. I can see their talent. I've worked with extraordinary mathematicians in the investment industry, economists, in the sports. I've seen extraordinary God-gifted talent, stuff that you're only given, certain height levels or VO2 maxes you're given. You can't create an extraordinary VO2 max like Lance Armstrong has, right? You're only given it. You can work to having a great pitching arm, but some people are just born with it. So when you see these extraordinary gifts and talents or musicians, but then they've got this demon, it's like, it's frustrating for someone like me who can see their potential, but also know that they're fighting a demon that's virtually impossible without the proper help.
Yeah, I know a few people like that, actually. Yep. Absolutely brilliant.
Right.
But, can't seem to get over to the other side because of all of the extra things that are really holding them down. I'd like to say bondage, because we all may have our afflictions with certain forms of bondage, right, but you have to be able to discern that, recognize it, and really set yourself on a course that when you know that particular bondage is coming up, you do the opposite so that you can stay, working in your gift. Well, we're running out of time, but I want to get this book in here because you are writing a book called One Rowing Stroke at a Time. I want you to tell me what this book is about, what you're hoping to achieve with the book, and then where people can connect with you at.
Sure. So the book is One Rowing Stroke at a Time, and it's surviving two separate 2.8 centimeter cancer tumors. So back in 2000, my cancer size was 2.8 centimeters. And then ironically, as life would have it, when I had the brain surgery done on a benign meningioma, again, it's benign, it's just a regular tumor, happened to be growing in the right side of my brain. Wouldn't you know, it was 2.8 centimeters. What are the odds? In fact, when he told me the size of it, my memory bank was like going through, and I'm like, wasn't that the size of my breast tumor? And as soon as I got home, I'm fumbling through looking for that original diagnosis, and there it was.
Wow.
So it's essentially, I'm not into drama. I'm so sorry. I'm not into reality shows. I don't watch soap operas. I couldn't tell you what happened back in the day on Dynasty and all those other shows. So there's not drama discussed in the book, but it's really how I worked through each situation to persevere. And yes, there's a ton of scripture in it. I've raised in a conservative Christian family, but then I also grew up in a predominantly Jewish community. So I had the best of both worlds, from the Old and the New Testament. And then through the course of my rowing career, depending on where I was in the U.S., I would be going to that church that was local. So I'm in Augusta, Georgia. There was a Baptist church. And that's where I went after practice, because that was right there for me to go. So I've had a wide range of exposures to different Christian churches. So I have a lot of sort of scripture throughout that helped me to persevere, but also it just talks about how I use my athletic background, how I was inspired by my special needs brother, who unfortunately passed 3 weeks ago. He had cerebral palsy, one lung, and a number of other challenges. So he was an inspiration for me to not only write this book, but as you can imagine, for sports, right? Because I'm able to do something that he couldn't. I actually gave him all of my rowing medals because they didn't mean anything to me, right? They're not going with me anywhere, when God brings me home. So I gave them to him because I'm like, you're part of the inspiration on this. Like, I can't claim this. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I incorporate, scripture, my brother, and then rowing. Those are the sub themes that I use to explain the path that I took that worked for me. And then maybe that path will help other people. Because this time around, even though we're in a pandemic, which is not the best time to get diagnosed with anything, because I was so experienced in handling that on my own before, and that I did do the financial aspect, the insurance aspect. I handled all my appointments. I made sure everything was done on my own. This time around, it was kind of easier because it was second nature. I knew what to do, prepping for surgery. Like, I started training harder in October when I was diagnosed. So I thought, I need to get into better shape for surgery. I need to set them up for success, meaning the surgeons, and I got to set my body up for success so it can just plow through the surgery. And so 70 minutes after I was done with surgery and I was in the ICU, I'm like, I need to sit up and I need a Pepsi. And lo and behold, the nurses that sat me up, because I had been laying on one side for 5 hours. You can imagine as an athlete, we probably move around a lot in bed because we know we're attentive to our bodies. And I just felt like I was doing the mannequin challenge where I was just frozen in one area. And I'm like, I need to sit up. And they're like, can we get you anything? Yeah. I don't know why I wanted a Pepsi. I think I just needed sugar. And rather than asking for juice, I'm like, I want a Pepsi. So that's what they did. But because I was conditioned, I was able to work through it. And then I left, but they let me go after 2 days. I was out of the ICU that day, and they put me in a regular room. And then the doctor said, I need you to walk around the waiting area, the outside area. And I did. He said, all right, you can go. And I was gone. Why? Because I had trained for it, physically and mentally.
I want to ask you something, a really quick follow-up to this, because I didn't know your book had spiritual references. So I am a firm believer that everything that we go through in life, there is a spiritual or divine connection to why we were the chosen one to go through whatever we have gone through. What do you think your meaning is? What was your spiritual connection with all the things that you've gone through up to this point and up to writing that book? What do you think it was all for?
To be a healer in this life, because I believe I've also studied in 2004, just out of curiosity. I'm a naturally curious person. I'm a closet nerd. I love reading. I did study the Gita, Hindu. I studied Buddhism. I was reading about them on the side. Why? Because I wanted to find the parallels for each of them. And ultimately, it brought me closer then to Jesus and his purpose, and Moses, and understanding them all the better. But I wanted to find the purpose of what we're here for. And I'm a Libra, so I'm like, it's only fair to study the other spiritual beliefs and figure out the parallels. So that's when I realized that I must have been a healer. If it is true that there are past lives and I'm here again, maybe I was a healer, which is why this is easier for me to understand it. And it might be harder for other people. And that's why I'm willing to help other people, because there are certain things I'm not able to do that I would need assistance with. I always joke around, decorating is not my thing. My idea of decorating is bringing in a couple bottles of wine, putting them in the wine rack, and bringing in a couple herbs. I've decorated. I don't have the eye for it. So naturally, I would need somebody experienced to do it. When it comes to something as scary as cancer, or imagine heart disease, that's another big struggle we have in the United States. At least I'm here to guide people through it, because not everyone has the analytical skills to figure it out. It's too overwhelming. It's too daunting. So I must have been a healer.
That's deep.
It's the only way I can figure it out, because it just it doesn't add up. I created the cancer, so now I have to uncreate it.
Okay, so I literally just put out this little small video yesterday because it was just on my mind. I was talking about purpose and how purpose equals power. And you just summed it up right there for me. Purpose is your power, right? So we don't really recognize that some of the things that we're doing, or that the environments we put ourselves in, we have the power to remove ourselves from that, to remove the affliction that may stem from that. But we also have the power to heal ourselves. We have and some people may say, well, that sounds so demonic. Like, if God is the only healer, how do we have power to heal? Because God is supposed to be within us, right? So if He is within us, He has granted us His power. We should have the power to do what is necessary to keep moving us forward through this life so that we can live our purpose.
And if we feed the scripture, both in the Old and New Testament, that is nourishment, spiritual nourishment, and that can help us towards healing. There's so much scripture.
Wow.
But my podcast yesterday that I did, I actually extracted a lot of scripture that were talks about healing. And actually, before this surgery I sent my niece, much to her dismay, a quick quiz on scripture healing. And I didn't include like the numbers or the books. And I was like, okay, it's a scavenger hunt. I need you to find these. She's like, are you kidding me? I'm like, no, I'm not. Because there's healing scripture. I mean, and there's healing scripture in the Torah. There's healing scripture in the Gita. And for the East Indian culture. So, there's healing scripture in Native American. It's everywhere. So it's ours for the taking.
Yeah.
To use. So that also helps. And as you know, as an athlete, it's amazing what we can program our minds to do to have our bodies execute it. I mean, it's absolutely amazing what we can ask our bodies to do. So if we can ask our bodies to do something athletically, why can't I ask it to heal? Why can't I visualize? I used a lot of visualization. I'm sure you use visualization all the time. Every athlete is, for the most part, would have some visualization background. Well, I used to visualize, and I'm not a tennis player, that cancer was coming to me, and it were the cancer balls, and my job was to whack them. And in real life, it's all I could do to keep that yellow ball in the white lines. But that was what worked for me, or I went into a rowing mode, and my job was to push away from all the cancer boats that were trying to catch me. And I'm picking up speed. Those are two sports that resonated with me, but that was my visualization in my body to remove it.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense.
That makes a lot of sense.
Sounds silly, but it worked.
No. It makes a lot of sense because to want success, you should be visualizing what that looks like for you. And so, we may not find ourselves in different situations that we may not have thought we would be in. But the core work is still the same, visualize it, because I think there's something so strong with the mind that when you can visualize something happening, it can turn into your reality. And that's what has happened for you. Where can people find you, Beth, and connect with you?
My website is selfreliant.info. Info is short for information. That's selfreliant.info. And that's where they can actually read my blogs. I did a lot of research at Carnegie Mellon University on not only just addiction, but those on the other side of it. And there are a number of blogs posted there. Information, real life content from Carnegie Mellon University. And then that's where my contact information is as well. And they can learn about my career background.
Okay. You said selfreliant.info?
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you again for coming on to this platform. It's been amazing. And I feel like this was right on time and in alignment with mental health awareness. So much, so many, it was a lot, but it's good information because I really feel like this is going to help a lot of people's lives, not just the people who are non-addicts, but also the individuals who are addicts and why they are the way that they are. What environment were they catapulted in that created a trauma for them that they're trying to heal, but albeit doing it the wrong way. So thank you again so much for coming on. Listen, guys, it's been my pleasure to be your host again today. Make sure that you go and follow us on Instagram at What Are You Sporting About? And check out the website, prosportlawyer.com. Stay updated. We have blogs on there, everything that you need to know for athletes and business. And I also want you to make sure that you follow us so that you can get information on the upcoming book launch for Athletes Making Moves. Make sure you go to Facebook and join the movement, Athletes Making Moves, on Facebook. Again, my name is Savannah DeBarros, the protector of athletes. And until next time, we'll check you later. Ciao.
Thanks for joining us this week on What Are You Sporting About podcast. Make sure to visit our website, prosportlawyer.com, where you can subscribe to the show in iTunes, Stitcher, or whatever your favorite platform is, so you'll never miss a show. And while you're at it, if you found value in the show, we'd appreciate a rating on iTunes or iHeartRadio. Or if you'd simply tell a friend about the show, that would help us out too. If you like the show, you might want to check out our book, What Are You Sporting About? Attorney Savania DeBarros is available for private consulting at sldebarros.com. And remember, we're here to educate, support, and guide you in your journey to success, because we're all sporting about something.